in many ways, like a very, very important concept in genetics. At the beginning of genetics was really with studying linkage, going back to Mendel and like practically breaking his laws. But we're going to talk about this in the process. So we say that two loci are linked, and here, because I hear that all the time, especially people that have not studied genetics, they say one loci, two loci. So it's one locus, two loci. It's Latin. That's how it's correct. There's no one loci. So two loci are linked when they are inherited and when they're passed down to generations together. And this usually means this means that they're close together. They're on the same chromosome, and that's why they're passed on together, with the exception of when there's a crossover, in which case they're not. But these are all things that we can calculate as we study lineage. So it's the non-independent assortment of two loci, and given that independent assortment was one of Mendel's laws, this is an exception to Mendel's laws. It's studied within families, and it can be studied either through genotype or phenotype. So we want to know if a locus is inherited together with another one. In order to see that, we need some kind of manifestation. One manifestation is the genotype. We can measure the genotypes and see if the specific alleles go down together. But another way to see it is the phenotypes. If we know the mode of inheritance, then if we know that this person is affected, that person is affected, this means that they got the same chromosome from the same parent. So this way we can see the segregation. So this way we can talk about linkage between two loci, when we can measure the genotype or the phenotype in each locus, or the linkage between a locus and a phenotype, which means that we use the phenotype to measure one locus and the genotype to measure the other locus and see if they're inherited together. And it will become more clear as we go further down this lecture. So this is in contrast with association, which only looks for a correlation between two observations. One is having a specific allele, and the other is having the genotype. The association is not studied, or does not have to be studied in families. It can be studied in the case of controls. It uses specific alleles, while in linkage alleles are used just to mark the chromosomes and to mark the locus. Okay. So I said that that linkage is an exception to Mendel's laws of independent assortment, and you might find this paper very entertaining to read and very interesting to read. This is a paper talking about Mendelian controversies and arguing that Mendel must have known that the law of independent assortment is often broken. Because when he was studying all these traits, the P's, he must have seen loci that are linked. And there's a book called The Monk in the Garden that I remember having read once, and it was argued that he actually did observe linkage and chose to ignore this data and just publish on the rest of the data, which is not a great thing to do, but it works, I guess. So this is an excerpt from that paper saying that since there's only 7 chromosomes on the organism that Mendel was studying, in order for all these loci to be independent, each one of them, all these loci that control the traits that we studied, in order for them to be independent, each one of them would have to be on a different chromosome. So the chances of this happening just by chance are very low. Does anybody think they can explain why this is the formula that gives it? It says 6 out of 7 times 5 out of 7 times 4 out of 7, blah, blah, blah. So it's less than 1% chance of him choosing this trait by chance. Can somebody explain? Yes.
So essentially, like you're saying, okay, for the first one, it can be on any chromosome. Then the next one can be any of the 6 remaining. And you can do any of the 5, and you're basically working your way.
So it's the probability on every pick that you do. At first you have 7, it doesn't matter which one you pick. But that one sets the expectation. So after that, we have 5, of which we have to pick one other one, not that one. And that's 5 out of 6 out of 7. And then the next one, there's only 5 remaining to choose from the 5 out of 7. And then you go all the way to the last pick, which is the one that's left. You multiply all this, the rule of multiplication probability we talked about in the last lecture. Then you find this, that's the probability of finding.
Although at the beginning of his paper that you all read in concept, Mendel states how he went about choosing the trait. And he has several a priori, he states how he wanted these traits to be before he starts bringing them together.
This paper goes through in-depth discussion of all this. Actually, the paper is all about that. There's no data. It's all about so it's very interesting. And I'm not saying that Mendel was hiding something, but everything is possible. So the discovery of linkage, there's like 2 important papers that started the whole process of studying genetic linkage. First, there's this paper by Patterson who crossbred pea plants in similar experiments to Mendel, trying practically to do more of what Mendel was doing. And he found linkage between the traits. He did not find independent segregation between the traits. And then there's Morgan's paper who was talking about who did further studying of crossover frequency, of distance, and so on. Morgan gave his name to the unit of genetic distance, the centimorgan, which is the distance at which there's a 1% combination. So the combination is important in linkage. So what is the recombination? So why is it important? So linked loci are those that are inherited together 100% of the time. If 2 loci are not linked, this means that they're inherited together about 50% of the time. The stochastic variation of that, it's going to be about 50%. If it's significantly more than 50%, then there is linkage with some degree of combination. So the fraction at which there is recombination is symbolized by the Greek letter theta, and the reason we believe that there is a combination between loci that are on the same chromosome is because they are crossover or chiasmata, and the number of crossovers between 2 loci depends on their distance. If they're very close, there's none. If they're further, there's more of a chance that there'll be a crossover. So you know that, so I talked about chiasmata, I talked about crossover. This is what happens in the first, in meiosis 1. You probably know where the homologous chromosomes come together and they can exchange material. I don't know if this is visible in the slide, but okay, so the the sister chromosomes that come together, the DNA crosses from one to the other, and then you get a chromosome that is a mix and has material. So here you see some material from one chromosome, and another is switched over to material from the other homologous chromosome. There's 2 crossovers here, that's why it's a fragment, and this will go on to be in the 4 gametes, where 2 of them, one here and one there, will have the recombined material. So the chiasmata separate alleles of loci that are on the same chromosome, this is more or less the same thing we're seeing in the whole meiosis slides before. But you can imagine if there's the two homologous chromosomes and there's the SNP, for example, here an A, G SNP with alleles A and G, and further down the chromosome there's alleles E and C. If a crossover takes place like it does here, then what happens is that when previously the haplotype was A, G, and GC, now you have two additional haplotypes introduced, AC here, well, one additional haplotype, the AC haplotype, which and then it's for, and the other one being the GC. Does that make sense? So this is how we can see recombination by genotyping, and I'm going to give more examples of that. So we talked about the combination. We also talked about genetic distance. Genetic distance is the genetic equivalent to physical distance, like how far to loci from the chromosome, except it's not measured in base pairs, but it's measured in centimorgans because it's not based on the actual physical distance, but on the frequency with which there is a combination between the two loci. And it's not as simple as that to calculate, because you can imagine, so let's say we have two loci, the three loci, A, B, and C, and the recombination fraction between A and B is 1%, is 10%, 0.1. The recombination fraction between B and C is 0.2. Then the recombination between A and C is not going to be the sum of this 0.3. It's going to be 0.28. Can somebody tell me why this would be the case? So the combination is the observation of the alleles not being inherited together, right? We don't really know if there's a crossover between them, but we assume that the crossover between them is the reason. So here in 10% of meiosis there's a crossover. Here in 20% of meiosis there's a crossover. However, in 10% times 20%, 2% of meiosis, there will be two crossovers. And when there is two crossovers, the alleles between the two markers will again look like they're inherited together, because the two crossovers cancel each other out and we don't see that. So the recombination fraction will become 0.28, which is why, although the chromosomes might be very long, the recombination fraction between loci is never going to exceed 0.5. So at some point they'll just be randomly inherited, like 50% of the time together, 50% of the time not together. But it's never going to exceed that. So this is why when we measure, so when you hear about the length, the genetic length of chromosomes, you hear that they can be multiple centimorgans. They don't stop at 50, they can be 130 centimorgans. But this doesn't mean that there's 130% recombination between the ends of it. Between the ends will be 50% recombination. This means that there's a lot more crossovers than we actually observe between the ends. And there's ways to calculate that from the measurements of recombination between loci. And I'm not going to go through the details of how these calculations are done. I'm just going to say there's two methods that are usually used. When I was doing more linkers, it's not done that much today, but we always use the Kosambi algorithm to calculate what the genetic length is. And the other common use algorithm is the Chaldean algorithm. And just another piece of knowledge, the genome itself is close to 3,000 centimorgans, which means really that a centimorgan is about 1 megabase, given the total length of the gene. But again, this is, do I have male? So I think I have it somewhere in this slide deck, but the male, in the males, okay, it's like that, yeah. So it's 2.8 in males and 4.7 in females. So in females, there's way more meiosis, there's twice as much meiosis as there is in males, in male meiosis. So another concept to be aware of, although it doesn't really have much use in linker, but it's an interesting biological phenomenon, is the phenomenon of interference, which means that when there is one crossover somewhere on the chromosome, it is less likely for another crossover to happen very close by. So there's some kind of protection against multiple crossovers very close distance on the chromosomes. So let's get a little bit into how we actually measure these things. So how we measure linkers, how we look for linkers. So in linkers, what we do is we use DNA variation as a marker so that we can know which chromosome, which part of the chromosome we're looking at when we study the segregation down pedigree. So here I'm just showing a number of different chromosomes that I have them together in the two allelic chromosomes. And you can see that they carry a lot of markers, and every marker by their genotype gives a unique haplotype. And by knowing this unique haplotype, if we see the genotypes of the next generation, we can see which haplotypes are inherited, so we know which chromosomes are inherited. So it serves kind of like a signature of what chromosome is it that we're looking at. So this way we can take the pedigree and we can say, okay, this person takes this part of the maternal chromosome, that part of the maternal chromosome. This person also has the disease or doesn't have the disease. So we can go down and look to see where the two things coincide, where the presence of the disease and the inheritance of a specific segment of the chromosome happen together more often than one would expect by chance. In order to be able to do that, it's important that we have heterozygosis, because, so for example, in this pedigree, the grandfather here is heterozygous for at least specifically with just one marker now. It's heterozygous AC for this marker. The mother is homozygous AA. No matter what, so you see that all the offspring have an A. And this is what you expect, because the mother only has A's to give her, they must take one chromosome from the mother. Also, because these two are indistinguishable for us, although they come from the different allelic chromosomes of the mother, we cannot distinguish between them. It's always an A the way we see it. So we have no information about what happens in the mother's meiosis, what is inherited. On the father, however, the father is heterozygous, so he has AC. So whenever we see an offspring getting the C, we know it's this chromosome of the father. While when the offspring gets an A, we know one A is from the mother, so we can assume safely that this A is from the father. Then we know that it's this chromosome from the father. So if the father had a disease, we would know if it is segregated or not. So the meiosis where we can have the information of what was inherited, we call those an informative meiosis. So continuing down the pedigree, we can still see the seed from the father going down to the next generation. So this is another informative meiosis down to the next generation. Now with biallelic markers like SNPs are usually, there is somewhat less information. There's actually quite a bit less information than if we had multi-allelic markers. The reason being that you can imagine that if the mother here was also AC heterozygous, then this would no longer be an informative meiosis because we would not know where the seed came from. come to the parts. This is why in the past we were using microsatellites that have multiple alleles and whatever the velocity can reach 90% or more, because they were way more informative. So here I'm showing on the left the level of the slip for that pedigree, and it's the same thing, the same pedigree we saw earlier. These slips have the highest heterozygosity you can get for a slip is 50%. So for one thing, you start with less of a chance of an informal meiosis because there's less of a chance of heterozygosity. But also you cannot say, if this was not a favorable crossing, you would lose that information too, even in heterozygotes. With microsatellites, where you can have 10, 12, 13 alleles, heterozygosity are high because each chromosome has a different allele. So you can actually see everything that's happening going down the chromosome. Almost every meiosis is informative. The problem here is that genotyping microsatellites is way more labor intensive than genotyping SNPs has become. This was not the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago it was easier to genotype microsatellites, and all the linkage scans were done by microsatellites. But now, people will actually do a SNP array, they will genotype 1 million SNPs. They will throw away most of the million SNPs because we don't need more than 100,000 SNPs to get enough information for linkage. They will keep only the most informative SNPs and then use those to do the linkage study. So one concept we didn't really talk about that should be done after everything else we talked about should be pretty easy to understand is phase. So when we're looking at pedigree, when we first look at this genotype, we're now looking at 2 SNPs at a time. So when we look at this combination of genotypes, we know that the one that has a chromosome that has an A and a chromosome that has a C, we also has a one that has a G and a one that has a T. And even if we assume it's the same chromosome, we don't know if the A and the G are inherited together, and the C and the T are inherited together, the way they seem to be implied here, or if the A is inherited with the T, and also the C with the T. But once we have an informative meiosis, we can get information about what is expected to be inherited with what. So if we look at the first offspring, we see that the first offspring inherits has an AC genotype here, which means, well, let's say this in a different way. So the mother here is homozygous for both. So the haplotype that comes from the mother, assuming these are 2 linked loci, will have to be AG. Whatever else is left will be a haplotype coming from the father. Okay? So we see the AG haplotype here as expected, that comes from the mother. So the other, the CT, must come from the father. And so now, having seen this person, we know that the phase, the way the 2 alleles combine, is C and T, C with T. This is again assuming that they're linked. Because then we can go to the next person. Again, we see the AG, the AG haplotype from the mother, and we see the CT haplotype again from the father. So this, since we know from here the phase is set, that this is what we expect that CT will be inherited together. The fact that we see it here, there's only a 50% chance of this happening by chance if they're not linked. So this is, we're getting what we want. So in other words, if I were to flip a coin twice, what are the chances that I'll get heads? Well, what are the chances that I'll get the same thing twice? So the first flip sets the phase, like what do I expect to see? So if the first flip is heads, the second flip then starts giving me information, telling me that the second one is heads too. So it's either I'm very lucky or there's something wrong with this coin. something wrong being that there's linkage. There's something that is not that keeps it from being a 50% chance. Next person, again AG from the father. So we know the CT, so the other one presumably is AG. So this is again supports that the two are linked. And same thing for the last one. So the chance of this part of the pedigree happening if there is no linkage is 50% is 1 over 50% times 50% times. I'm sorry, there is no linkage. So it's 50% times 50% times 50%. So it's 0.5, 0.25, 0.125. There's a 12% chance of no linkage. So there's a 12% chance that all these 3 times happen to show the same phase as the first time by chance. 3 flips of the coin, 3 times 50%, 12.5%. And the alternative that this is because of linkage is the rest what's left from 12.5, so it's 87.5% chance that there is linkage. Okay. If we add more individuals, and here we have here we know that this is a haplotype, we know that AG is a haplotype because its already phase has already been established for this person. So CT is a haplotype 2. Here the other parent contributes an AT. So the AT is not from this parent, the AG is from this parent. The AG is still on the same, still the same like we observed. That's another 50%. So that it will happen by chance. And the same thing happens here, the AD and the CT. So 12.5% this is by chance from here, times 0.5 makes it 6.25%, times 0.5 makes it 3.125%. So there is a very high chance that there is more than 95% chance that this represents linkage between the two markers. Is that clear to everybody, or did somebody lose me?
Does that include, I don't know, sorry, yeah, sorry, I don't know if this is like relevant, but does that include the fact that like there could be like some kind of recombination, but it's just the fact that A and G go together?
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's a very good question. I'm simplifying this because otherwise it becomes very difficult to I just want to understand the concept. So this assumes that there is no recombination. Now, it could be that you have a much bigger pedigree to have enough information, but then you could see suddenly that a person loses that phase, and it's in a different phase. So this would go in the other direction. It would reduce the chance of linkage. But you can actually calculate, and that's what we do when we look for linkage. We calculate the possibility of linkage under 0 recombination, possibility of linkage under 1% recombination, under 10% recombination. It gives a different probability. It adds more parameters to the calculation, which is why I did not include it here. But it still gives an accurate estimate of those linkage. You can still get statistically significant linkage even in the presence of 10 or 20% recombination. But if you see those results, usually the confidence goes down as the combination goes up. We measure because with lot scores, I'm going to talk about how this means, but the more you increase the combination that you expect, the lower your lot score. But it can still be significant. It is still strong. So I showed 2 markers. As we get genotype more markers, we get more and more information. And so here I have 3 markers, and I have colored. I have colored the haplotypes so that we can follow them down the chromosome. I conveniently always make one parent being homozygous because this allows us to see the phase. it's, as I said, that's one of the problems with SNPs, that this is not always the case, of course. But then there'll be other markers down the chromosome for which this happens. So you can always get this information. It just gets more computationally intensive, but that's why we have computers that do this for us, and we don't try to do it by hand. So here you see all the haplotypes with colors and as they go down the chromosome. Now, an advantage the more markers you get, for one thing, the more confidence you get on your haplotype, but for another, you can start to really point to where combination events happen. And I believe I have a slide on that. Oh, before that, I want to introduce two important concepts, identity by state and identity by descent. So when you have two alleles that come from the same individual going up on the pedigree, from the same ancestor, they come from the same ancestral chromosome, then we say that they're identical by descent. So here, the C alleles on these two individuals, we know they both come from the mother, because we know that the father contributes to the G allele. So these are identical by descent. In contrast, the G alleles, they're also identical, they're also both G, but one of them here comes from the father, and one of them is from the father. Yeah, this one comes from the father, while this one here comes. Is it wrong? Is it this wrong?
It's from a different haplotype, but it's from the same person.
It's from the same person. Yeah, so it's still. So this is still identical by state, not identical by descent, because it's from a different haplotype. That's why I was picking this to show. But you're right. This is not identical. This is from a different haplotype of the same person, but it's not the same gene. It's not from the same chromosome. So this is also identical by state. This is much cleaner, which is why I put my arrows there and not here. And because here we know that this is from the father. Actually, no, this is again from the same person. Yeah. But how about this? Anyway. So this is, again, this is identical by state. So the difference between identical by state is whether it comes from the same ancestral chromosome or from different chromosomes.
Does identical by state have to come from the same person, or can it come from either parent?
Identical by state does not have to come. Identical by state means it's a gene.
So like on the far right are green AAs with the genotype of AA.
Yeah, these are identical by state. It just means that it's and identical by state. If it's identical by descent, by definition, it's identical by state. Yes.
So in practice, when we're reading papers that would be referencing this, are they usually talking about individual SNPs? Are they talking about blocks? What is it usually?
For identical by state or by...
Yes.
So the way I have mostly seen it, you can talk about haplotypes that are identical by descent, especially when you're looking at the rare mutation that happens and you see 10 people around the world. You can look at the haplotype around it and see if it always the same haplotype, and then you can assume that these are identical by descent because they all came from all new mutations in the haplotype. But we mostly use this in linkage and in non-parametric linkage that I will touch on down the top of this lecture. So we mostly use it for that in order to try to differentiate between the two kinds of identity, what carries information and what doesn't. Because identity by state does not mean that by not coming from the same parent does not mean that it's linked to the same risk allele as well. area of interest. So here, another concept is like I would ask you the question: how many alleles are certainly shared identically by descent in this study? So we have a heterozygous father, homozygous mother, and these are the two children of the dwarfing are heterozygous. So how many alleles are shared certainly identical by descent? 1, 0, 1, or 2. That's one of these are the three possible answers. So A, we know comes from the father, we know comes from one of the two paternal chromosomes, and not the other, because the other is C. So one of them is shared for sure identical by descent. The other one is C, and presumably they both come from the mother, but we don't know which one of the mother's chromosomes it comes from. So we're not certain. So only one of you is shared, certainly identical by descent. A different question, though, is what are the probabilities of IBD sharing? So what is the chance of sharing 0 by descent? And the chance here is 0 because we know that this is share 1 for sure. What is the chance of sharing one allele identical by descent, and what is the chance of sharing 2 alleles by identical by descent? So we're going to make this easier, we're going to start by the chance of sharing 2 alleles identical by descent. We know they share 1. The chance of these 2 C's being the same C from the mother is 50%. So there's a 50% chance of sharing identical by descent 2 alleles. And given that the entire probability space is 1, meaning that if it's not, that these 3 things must add up to 1. So that this is 50%, this is 0, this has to also be 50%.
Okay. 50%, they're not IBD for the second.
So there's the 50% chance they're not IBD for the second and 50% that they are. So there's a 50% chance that they're only IBD for 1. Now this is the way that we usually calculate probability when we do non-parametric linkage, where we look at allele sharing, because this gives us the full information of what we know about how much allele sharing there is. While the previous one, if you want to go, certainly ignores the 50% chance that there is, that the other one could be identical by the same as well. So as I said, when 2 link traits are not inherited together, we say there's a combination, that we measure it by theta. And theta is actually the number of observed recombinations, where we see that the 2 alleles are not inherited together, divided by the number of informative meiosis, because when a meiosis is non-informative, we really don't know if there is a recombination. Okay? So when theta is 0.5, we say that there is no linkage. It never is more than 0.5. It can be less than 0.5 if there is linkage, but it's never more than 0.5, although you might see in the data that it looks at 0.55, but this is stochastic variation, by chance you see a few more combinations than expected by chance. So if it's less than 0.5, then that's, if there is statistical support, then it may be linked. So what is it informative meiosis? Meiosis is we have enough information to know whether there is a combination or not. I guess this is more or less a duplicate slide of what we saw earlier. It just again shows that this is an informative meiosis because we know it comes from the mother. We don't know how these 2 alleles are combined, but but after we see the first offspring, we can tell which one they are. So it's an informative biomarker. Sorry for the duplicate. It's the first time I put this lecture together, so.
But isn't that second meiosis show a recombination here when we go down to the first son?
The first son is an AG.
No, I'm wrong.
So one thing to realize that I'm putting this together in a way to make it easy for everybody to look at. Unfortunately, the data is not that easy in terms of, I'm putting the face here on the way that it actually is. I'm putting AAT in the way that it will be. But if this was AC and this was PG, it would be much more confusing to see what the phase is. But then you do the trick of switching around the way you write things, and that makes it much easier to understand what's going on. Now, luckily, you were not going to have to do linkage writing because there's computer programs that do this. I do think it's important to have done it by hand, to just understand exactly what it is that the computer does. At some point, the calculator becomes way too intensive to do it by hand, but at least you know how it's done. All I'm saying is that the program layers could also be established phase. So this was, we looked at markers that are linked with each other, but we usually are interested in finding the location of the disease gene on the map. So there we don't know the disease variant, so we cannot genotype it, of course. We want to find if it's linked with anything. So we don't know the disease variant, but we know the phenotype that it causes. And if we assume an inheritance model, as it's called, which more or less means if it's dominant or recessive or any other modes of inheritance. So if we assume that, then we can use that as proxy for the genotype. So here we have a pedigree. I have a 4 allelic marker A, B, C, D, just to make the reading of it easier. And we have a number of people that are affected. And the way linkers will look on this pedigree is that we see that every affected person, so the father is affected, so the disease locus, the disease allele, mutation will have to either be together with the A allele or the B allele of this marker. The first individual has the disease, so it should have the mutation, and also has allele A of this marker. The first person sets the phase. Okay? Now, after the phase is set, we can go to every other individual. And here, if we assume full penetrance for the trait, then the information is not only good for the affected people who know have the mutation, but also for the unaffected people who know they don't have the mutation, who know every other chromosome. So this is an unaffected child of this father, which means that whatever allele he inherited from the father is the one that's not with the mutation. And this person inherited allele B from the father. So this, again, is evidence for linkage. And as we go down, we'll see the next affected daughter also has the A allele, and the other affected daughter also has the A allele, and this continues all the way down the pedigree. So this is how we can establish linkage between the marker and the disease phenotype, the disease allele in this case. So this is how we can establish linkage, and we can also, so we establish linkage given a specific model of inheritance. This model that says that there is complete penetrance and that this is autosomal dominant. So under this model, perfect linkage in this found. So when we do parametric linkage, this means that we can we can give, in this case, we can give the computer the parameters of inheritance, which means that we know the relationship between the phenotype and the gene level. What I was saying, autosomal, dominant, and descendants. These are the parameters. And so the linkage model that we give the computer is our attempt to guess what the parameters are. We have a pedigree that we see, it's an autosomal dominant pedigree, but we see, for example, that there is an obligate carrier. So an obligate carrier within an autosomal dominant pedigree would be a person that does not exhibit the phenotype, but passes it on to the next, to his or her offspring, which means that the mutation must be there. For some reason, this person was not fully penetrant. So then in the model, we will prefer to establish, to give some fraction of reduction in penetrance, such as 90% penetrance, in order to get the best result. So we want to give it the disease allele frequency. This usually depends on the frequency of the disease itself. We want to give it the penetrance and the phenocopy frequency. So which means that what is the chance of receiving the same diagnosis, having the same phenotype or similar phenotype without having that allele, without taking that same gene. So usually what we give the computer in order to do the calculation looks like this. It's just literally three numbers. It's the frequency of disease for each genotype. And if little d is the mutation genotype, then the first model we say there's no chance of being sick if you don't have it. This means there's no phenocopies. This means that that nobody can look the same if they don't have that mutation, that gene. There's a 100% chance if you have the mutation in heterozygosity or in homozygosity. So that's a dominant model, full penetrance, no phenocopies. As you go down, like in model 3 here, there's a probability of having the disease, say 1%, if you don't have a mutation in that same gene. So if that's rarely, so that would have to be a common disease, but if there's a 1% of the population that has this phenotype without a mutation in that gene. But if there is a mutation in that gene, there's an 80% chance, so the penetrance is not 100%, so they will reduce for heterozygous. And for homozygous, it's 100%, and so on. This is how we tell the computer what the model is. That's what the model of linkage is. And then how do we measure to see if linkage is significant? The observation of cross-aggregation of specific alleles with the disease is actually significant. And for that we use log scores, and log is the logarithm of the odds. And the logarithm of the odds is the 10 base logarithm of the fraction being the likelihood of the alternative hypothesis given the observation. The alternative hypothesis being that there is no linkage. So what's the likelihood there is no linkage? Divided by the likelihood of the null hypothesis given this observation. Okay, I'm sorry to gather the numerator. The odds for linkage divided by the odds for null linkage. So the way to calculate this, I don't think I have this here. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to go back to this page and try to walk you through how one would calculate the log score. So as we said, the first individual sets the phase. The second individual has a 50% chance of happening like that if there is linkage, and a 50% chance of looking like that if there is no linkage. The third individual has, again, a 50% chance of looking like that if there's, I'm confusing myself. So what I'm trying to say is that this, you can measure the informative meiosis here to see how many, so the first sets the phase, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 informative meiosis, and then in the next generation 5. These are not informative because the disease is not present, so there is no heterozygous disease locus. So we were at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 informative meiosis. Okay? One of these informative meiosis sets the phase, and all the others have a 50% chance of showing the linkage. So the probability that there is linkage, that there is no linkage in this pedigree is 0.5 to the power of 10. And 0.5 to the power of 10 is about 1 in 1,000. And that's, it's 1 in 1024. So the base 10 logarithm of 1 in 1024 is 10 to the minus 3. So it's actually minus log 10. So the log square here is 10. The probability of the data, of this data under the hypothesis of linkage is 100%. It's fully, the data is fully compatible with linkage, but it's not compatible with not having linkage. That's why the fraction of the likelihoods that I showed earlier. That's why the fraction of this likelihood is log 10. Because the numerator, so the fraction of the alternative hypothesis, so the odds for linkage compared to the odds for no linkage, the odds for linkage are 100%. The odds for no linkage are 1 over 1,000. So this makes this fraction to be 1,000, and this makes the log 10 of that being 3. So that's a log square of 3. Traditionally, a log square of 3 is considered enough evidence genome-wide for linkage. When this was done, we were not really doing genome-wide studies. People were mostly targeting places for linkage. The actual number is a little higher, to calculate around 3.6 now, based on the multiple comparisons, but it's still within that range. So a log square of 3 is still considered a good, strong log square. So as I said, we have the parameters together with the data allow the calculation of these likelihoods for that fraction, and the log square can be calculated for any distance of that from that margin. So the computer will calculate, it will give it, it will calculate for any given recombination factor what are the chances that this is linkage. And as I said, the further you go, the weaker the linkage will be, but it can still be there, it can still be significant. And the likelihood at which linkage is maximum is the most likely, the best estimate for the most likely distance of the locus, of the market of the study versus the locus that we're looking for. And this really depends, I would say ordinary markers are informative, but then you have multi-point markers. So when you're doing multi-point linkage, then you can actually, then you'll see crossovers. So you see a crossover here on this person on the paternal chromosome, a crossover here on the maternal chromosome, crossover here, the paternal chromosome. And if you look at the segregation of disease, having these crossovers will allow you to narrow down to see that it is this segment of the chromosome that actually always segregates with the disease. The others don't always segregate because of the crossovers that sometimes separate them. And having done that, you can narrow the linkage between marker number 2 and marker number 4. So you know that 4 is crossed with it, you know that 2 is crossed with it, but in between them you don't know where these crosses are, so your locus is somewhere there. And then you can like go to other methods. So if this is a very dense map of markers, you could have narrowed it down to like 10 megabases. So then you can sequence all the genes in there. You can look to see what is there. Today we're just sequencing the whole genome and then also doing the linkage, just to throw away the mutations that are not in the linkage region. Those are the ones that will be very interesting. So multi-point linkage is what I just described. It gives you a big map of markers and the likelihood of linkage calculated for each location and can position it between two markers. There's two algorithms for studying multi-point linkage, and they are very distinctive to what they can do best. So there's the Austin-Stewart algorithm, very popular before we switched to SNPs, because it can handle very large pedigrees. So you can really get a lot of information out of your pedigree to get a large one. But the computation time is exponentially increasing with the number of markers, which means that when you go to SNPs, then you have to use about 10 times as many markers as you would use with microsatellites. This becomes prohibitive when your computer will just start and never finish the project. But there's also the Lander-Green algorithm, which uses a different way to calculate the linkage. It's appropriate for relatively small pedigrees because there you have exponential increase of the calculation time with the size of the pedigree. But it's only linear increase with more markers, so it can take a lot more markers. And that's what we use for studying linkage with SNP arrays. So linkage, parametric linkage performs very well in a billion disorders which are rare, where there's like full penetrance, usually or very close to full penetrance. With complex disorders, it's a problem because they have a high frequency, can reach like in some diseases more than 15%. They have familial aggregation, but they don't have a clean recognizable model inheritance. So it's very hard to pick a correct model to give. And you can't try multiple models, then you have to correct for the multiple ways that you're trying it. So it has the reduced efficiency, very much reduced efficiency for complex disorders. That's why people came up with allele sharing methods. And I'm only including this because historically that's what happened. It's a good thing to know about because it actually never gave any good results. It never showed us, like we had found linkage for the upper E lobes in Alzheimer's disease. The upper lobes is an exception because it has a risk of 2.5 for Alzheimer's disease, which is huge. Mostly the negative risk are at the 1.2 level for complex disorders. And then again, we had to the other 550 pedigrees in order to do that, just to find a locus that we knew already. It never gave any results. It doesn't have the power. But the way it works is that it calculates how many alleles are identical by this set in every location. So it takes the pedigrees, which allows it to calculate IBD sharing. And it compares the IBD sharing to the expected at every locus. The notion being that if the locus carries a disease allele in pedigrees, that you have a lot of disease, you will find it more often inherited in older people that have, but not necessarily every time and not just more often. So it kind of eliminates the need for a model. It just looks at the increased sharing in that location of the genome. So the way it's most often been done is with just sibling pairs, where you gather siblings that suffer from the same disease, like Alzheimer's disease, and then you run all the markers through them and then calculate their IgG sharing. So you have to carry siblings and their parents in order to calculate IgG sharing. And you expect, because they're siblings, that they will share IgG for 50% of their alleles at a time. Because they're small pedigree, sometimes they share 100%, sometimes they share nothing. So you average this whole thing, and then you see how much they share at each locus in the genome. If they share more, then you say the probability of linkage. The problem with all that, as I said, it never gave strong positive results because it's not powerful, it doesn't have statistical power. And it's very expensive to do, having to recruit all these individuals. So there was, and this is my last slide, because this will actually lead us to the next lecture, which is about association. Because in 1996, Lewis and Catherine Americanus from the NIH, they published this paper showing the power of non-parametric linkage versus the power of association. And it takes for different, like genotypic risk ratios, like how much risk is attributed by an allele, and for different frequencies of the disease allele, they calculate how many people you need in order to find linkage, and the numbers, when it goes to what we know, and that's even not as low as we know that it is, that the odds ratio is the risk ratio, the attributed risk of the risk alleles in common disorders. So when it goes to that, you see the number of pedigrees that we need to gather here. And that's really like 4 million pedigrees around that can actually do that. While if you do the same by association, correcting for multiple testing and all that, then the numbers become much more manageable. As I said, this is a higher number. At the time, they were hoping, that was wishful thinking, that it would be 1.5. But you see that the numbers here are in 1,000. Now we know that 1,000 is not enough because the risk is not 0.5. We know you need 10,000 or more. But this is the paper that first showed it. For some reason, well, not for some reason. So you could not genotype that many markers at the time. You could not cover the genotype in SNPs. It was impossible. The technology was not there. The SNP arrays were not there. So for this reason, it took a while. It took more than 5 years before people actually started doing association studies, association studies. And it took another 10 years before these studies became large enough to actually be positive results. But this is what started. That's why I wanted to put it up there. And I'll take any questions. And I will appreciate any feedback from you. As I said, this is the first time I've doing this lecture to this group.
So there are some problem sets that you and Don, is the same one that you did before, that will be assigned for you to work through these after these lectures are finished.
I think just as a point of feedback, I really appreciated every time that we actually looked at pedigree and had to calculate something out. I think that crystallized what we were talking about a lot better. So at least for me, that makes it stick.
I think, that's how I learned linkage, and I think that if you got to do it by hand first. If you don't do it by hand, You just put data in the computer and you're not gonna know what the computer is doing. Not that I can do what the computer does by hand, there's no way of it, but at least I know the concept.